You've entered Bookstorm with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back, listeners. We are absolutely excited to have the very wonderful Francine Rivers with us today. She is a New York Times and worldwide best-selling author. Her novels have been awarded or nominated for so many honors. After winning her third Rita Award for Inspirational Fiction, Francine was inducted into the Romance Writers of America Hall of Fame. Wow. She received the Lifetime Achievement Award from American Christian Fiction Writers. Francine's novels have been translated into 30 different languages. She enjoys bestseller status not only here in the U.S., but many foreign countries. You will know her most famously for her book, Redeeming Love. It sat on the New York Times and many bestseller lists for over 15 years. Amazing. It has sold millions of copies, and now keep your eyes out because it is a highly rated and acclaimed film just released in January of this year. Francine lives with her husband in Northern California and enjoys spending time with her children and grandchildren. Francine, we're just so pleased to have you here with us today.
It's wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you for joining us. We're here to talk to Francine today about her latest book, which is called The Lady's Mind, that Kristen and I thoroughly enjoyed.
Okay.
Wonderful. And now, Francine, without giving away any spoilers in the book, I like to give our listeners just a little bit of a glimpse about some of the factual background. And I know we're going to dive into some of the underlying themes, but if you'll indulge me, and you can add anything as well at the end. This book takes us right back to 1875. And we have a protagonist, Catherine Walsh, and she finds herself in this tiny mining town in the Sierra Nevada mountains, Calvada. Or I guess depending on how you pronounce Nevada or Nevada, you might pronounce this differently. How do you pronounce it?
Calvada.
Calvada. Okay, Calvada. And when she arrives in town, falling in love is the last thing on her mind. She has just been basically expelled from her Boston home by her wealthy stepfather. And we already see a little bit about her feisty spirit because she took part in suffragette protests and other things in Boston that I don't think sat well with him. But when she arrives in this town, she is there to basically claim an inheritance by an uncle that she has never met. And the inheritance is not much. It is basically a little shop on the main street of this mining town where there is a print press and also a mine that probably, or in her mind, was worth nothing. Now, when she arrives in town, it is full of saloons and bars and prostitution, houses of prostitution. There is a rough and tumble aspect because we have a lot of miners who are trying to strike it rich. She quickly sees some of the social ills that accompany a town along these lines. Women who are in poverty. We have men who are in very oppressive work situations with the mines. And women who are surviving through prostitution. This bothers Catherine, and she takes this on through her press, and it brings her head to head with some of the most powerful men in town. And I'm going to just add one thought about one of those men, Matthias Beck. He's the owner of a local saloon and hotel, and of course he's taken notice of this new woman in town. But these social problems start to become important to him as well. And we start to see so many cool things in this book, including the political process at issue. So I hope that's kind of a fair summary. I don't know if you want to add
Very
anything.
good. Very good. Like,
Did
Wonderful.
your homework.
yes.
We just adored it. We adored it. So, what I loved is this is just for our listeners a very romantic historical. And you get a little teary eyed, but I also laughed right out loud a few times. I love the scene in the beginning where the heroine, Catherine, sits down at the cafe and three miners approach her, one after another, hat in their hand, explaining where they live and what they do and would she marry them. And it just struck me so comically. And but then when I started thinking about it more, I thought it really made you realize during uncertain and difficult times, our needs drastically change. We could even look back in history during war times or during the Depression. You may have married someone that you didn't know very well for safety or comfort. Um, I wondered, love comes in so many shapes and forms, and we want it to be perfect and storybook, and sometimes it is, but it isn't always that way. And I wanted to ask you, as the writer and the creator of this beautiful character, Catherine, what do you think Catherine was searching for in in a man, and what did you, as the writer, cause her to finally see in Matthias?
Well, and first of all, she was not searching for a man. The last thing she wanted was a man, because what she had been seeing is that when a woman married at that time, she lost all of her rights. She lost the right to her whatever property she brought into the marriage. And the husband basically controlled all the assets. And she had seen the unfairness of it when she was back in Boston. And so that when she comes out to the West, she comes out to be an independent woman and to make her own way. And of course, I think she's expecting a little more than this rough and ready mining town, because she can smell the town like a mile away before they get there. And so she's also kind of trapped there. So there's a part of her that wants to make the best of a bad situation. You know, if this is the way it is, let's improve it. Let's make it a town decent enough to live in. And Matthias Beck, I don't think he's looking for a wife either. And they end up having common interests, but in a different way. She challenges him because of her faith and the way she stands up. She's very much like her uncle that she never knew, and he admired her uncle greatly. So it's sort of a learning about each other, and they're immediately attracted, which for her is like, whoa, I'm staying back from this because I don't want to get involved with any man. I don't want to get married. Um, and I think he's pretty well makes up his mind about halfway through that he's definitely wanting to marry her, but it's going to be a long courtship, long and difficult
And
courtship.
difficult.
And that's what we loved about these characters. There's such depth of character, and we can almost see ourselves in these characters too, or at least be angry with them, or long with them, or be frustrated with them. And this changing of Catherine and the changing of Matthias to where they were ready for this relationship with each other was really a wonderful thing that you orchestrated as the writer.
Well, and they were both outcasts because he was cast out of his family. He was a Southerner who decided to fight for the North because he believed in keeping the nation together, which put him in opposition to his own father. And then he was involved in Sherman's march to the sea. And of course, part of that ends up burning down his hometown. So he can't go back. He's rejected completely. And she is also rejected. So they're both disinherited in a way. And that begins to draw them together too. They begin to understand a little bit more about where the other one is coming from. But her concern, I think, is for the women. And she's really impacted by Rania Vanderstorm, who has the cafe, because she was a widow and yet she had some skills and she put them to good use. And women needed to help women at that time. Otherwise, they ended up living on the creek and starving out there or in prostitution just to survive.
Absolutely. I kind of picked up on this theme of lawlessness. And, we saw it in the town, right? These are miners. This was a very tough way to make a living. And I think this was happening all over Western towns where
Yeah.
people would, right, get word that there might be a strike at this mine, and all of a sudden a whole lot of people come immediately, and there's no infrastructure in place.
Yeah.
And I really liked this idea of kind of looking at Matthias as being inspired by Catherine in many respects. But he was also a man that a lot of people followed. And so he went into
Yes.
politics for that reason. And I was wondering, you know, why is it so hard for anyone, Matthias, Catherine, her uncle, to stand up to wrongs? Because there were a lot of things wrong here in terms of, violating the law, mistreating women. But there was also a repercussion when you stood up. And I was wondering if you could
Yes.
comment on that.
Well, in those days too, it could mean your life, which of course it does for City Walsh ends up being murdered. That's one of the first things she finds out when she gets there is her uncle was murdered. And so it's when you stand up for something, you have to expect that you're going to get that backlash. It may not be that way today, although I think it is that way in other countries, maybe not so much here. But you're really putting your life on the line to fight for others. And I think, though, that what I wanted to bring across too is that one person that has that inspiring spirit can draw many others to work with them. And Matthias has that charisma, and so does Catherine. And then when they come together to work together on various projects, of course, that's a win-win situation for the town. Not according to everybody that's there, because there were a lot of men that didn't want law. They were getting away from it all. So
Yeah.
they have to kind of grow the rest of the town up with them.
I like that. You showed so many facets of standing up. It's exhausting. Your reputation might get dragged through the mud. And in here, you even alluded to some of the environmental wrongs associated with mining in terms of some of the slurries coming out of the mines and then families living among that and poisoning the waters. And it was very subtle, but I was thinking to myself, in this town of lawlessness, there's so much you could stand up to. And
Yes. And she has to chip away at little bits.
yes.
And it married, so she gives him a list that's so long, she thinks it's impossible. He'll never be able to fill that list. But he already had that list in his own head. So it's like, oh, so he had his ways of knowing how he could get all that work done. And then of course, I had more fun writing this book because of course it was COVID shut in. And I thought what we need right now is to laugh. I wanted to just instill the thing with humor because I thought we're all so serious and we're all just kind of waiting for the mandates to stop and to be able to go outside our homes and that kind of thing. And I thought, we just need to take life, even though life can be so serious, we also need to be able to laugh in the midst of things.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I laughed right out loud several times during this. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I very much enjoyed it. And another thing I loved about Catherine, she comes to this town all dressed so fancy compared to
Yeah.
the miners' wives and very prideful and purposeful. And that was the one thing that Matthias really was attracted to about her because she was so different from everyone else there. And almost
Yeah.
she had a belligerent, strong-willed spirit that
Yeah.
she was cast away also, as you mentioned, but she was going to make it work.
Yeah.
And I just loved that about her character and the growth.
Well, and I think that the townspeople, and especially Matthias, they thought, oh, well, she won't last a week. She'll be back on that stage heading elsewhere. And what they didn't know about her is this was the end of the road for Catherine. And at the end of the road, she was going to make the best that she could make out of the place where she landed. And not just for herself, but for everybody that's there.
Mhm. And
And of course,
isn't
she's joining forces with other strong people in town, namely Rania has great influence over people. And Rania's kindness and the way she handles her cafe. She was one of my favorite characters.
Me too.
Think about City Wall, she was taking in the orphaned boy and raising him because it has a lot to do with our treatment of widows and orphans. So she has this heritage of an uncle who was helping a young man grow up, raising him up and teaching him a skill that he could eventually take over the newspaper.
Mhm. And there's something that really makes the reader think, even though this is historical, it really speaks to us in this modern time, that
Mhm.
it showed the reader when you're backed against a wall, you may find that you have strength you didn't even know you had. When you
Yeah.
don't have a choice, that you can't back out and you've got to face this problem or this difficulty or hurdle, and you just got to plow through, which is what both of these main characters did. And
Yeah.
as Kristen mentioned, I loved that they had the courage to be a voice, even if their lives were threatened.
Yeah.
And in today's world, also, when you are a voice, other voices do some, when you have the one voice that has the courage to speak, other voices sometimes do start to appear.
Yes. Yes. Well, and she wanted to do, when she finds out that the mine is actually worth something, she wanted to handle it completely differently than the way things were done at that time. And that, of course, made a stir. And there weren't that many people that were going to join her, but there were enough to get it started and make a success of it. So
Yeah.
then, there's a time for all things. And the mining industry was gradually dying out. And she was also looking for ways, well, what happens when the mining industry isn't there? What else can the town do in order to survive and be a decent, long lasting town? And of course, she figures that out at the end.
Yeah, I loved that. It was almost thinking about legacy and how
Yeah.
do we create something that is lasting. That's good.
Mhm.
Did you I wanted to ask you, Francine, in the 1870s, there's no social safety net for, widows, for children, just as you were referencing. And a lot of families fell through the cracks or lived lives of a lot of desperation. We've seen that throughout history. And a lot of women thought that perhaps prostitution was one of their only options.
Mhm.
And I loved, and I wanted you to kind of comment on this if you would, where Catherine looked at business and using other skills that you could market as a way out for women. And
Yeah.
I was thinking about how in today's society women have a lot more options. However,
Yeah.
there's the easy availability of making money on the internet through inappropriate pictures and other content that's being uploaded. And I was wondering if we're setting ourselves back and not relying on some of those other skills that we could be developing. What do you think about that?
Well, I think a lot of the things that are seen on the internet are not there because the women want them to be there. I think they've been trafficked and used. A young girl can send a nude photograph to a boyfriend, and then the boyfriend passes it along to somebody else, and it's there forever on the internet.
Yes.
So I think there's that aspect now, that there's actually more slavery and more human trafficking now than there's ever been in history. The young people are being groomed online, where they think that they're making a friend, and they're really in touch with the trafficker without knowing it. Um, but at that time, women didn't have the opportunities. And I think that, there are countries now where if a woman loses her husband, she is not allowed to work. So it's basically, well, how is she supposed to survive? What kind of a position are they putting her in? And at that time, if you're in a town where there's a schoolhouse, they only needed one school marm. And of course, the school marm couldn't get married. As soon as she married, then she had, quote, carnal knowledge and was not fit to be a teacher. How they figured that out with mothers. I mean, if
Yes.
mothers raising their children, it didn't make a lot of sense. But there just weren't the opportunities there. Women had to be very resourceful.
Yeah, it just highlights the how rights go hand in hand.
And Rania too. Rania was using the skills she had to also hire on widows who were destitute, and then give them training, give them a place to live, give them a start. And many of them were marrying. And ironically, that's what Catherine ends up, helping Elvira out of the house of prostitution and marrying a man that was in love with her.
Mhm.
So
Yes.
it's marriage at that time was just about one of the only things a woman could do to
Yeah,
survive.
it really highlights too the importance of having the right and the opportunity to vote and other
Yes.
rights that women have gained over time, including the right to contract and to
Yes.
enter into business relationships, and how important those are to realizing that, self-determination. So,
Yeah.
I loved that about the book too, that you wove into that timeline this ability to vote in 1919. And, we sometimes now today take it for granted.
Yeah.
And I thought, we have come a long way. But sometimes I think, have we? Because I think in business, you may have women still say that they are not treated equally. It's almost as if women were or are a form of a minority. And I guess it's always something that you must continue to strive for. I felt that you showed us that in the story to maintain
Yeah.
your rights and continue to fight for women's rights or minority rights.
Well, and I think women need to support each other. My daughter, she knew exactly what she wanted to do from the time she was a little girl. She wanted to get married and have children. And she graduated from high school. She got married, and she turned 18 all in the same week. And they had children, and she thought, I want to homeschool them. She homeschooled them all the way up through high school. One went through college, one went into the military, has like an AA degree, and they're both in intelligence. But there are women that when she goes to a business dinner with her husband, they'll talk to her and they'll say, well, what do you do? And she'll say, I'm a homemaker. And women will turn and walk away from her like she has nothing to offer. But she made that choice and she excelled at what she does. She volunteers and runs Vacation Bible School. She runs Awana groups, that kind of thing. But women need to respect the decisions that other women make too. And there are a lot of women that don't. They expect that the only way you can fight for women's rights is to be in business or be a successful entrepreneur or have a career. And that may not necessarily be the road for every woman.
We just were discussing this earlier today, that we are such a big believer to allow your child or someone in your family to pursue their own passion and their
Yes.
gift and their talent. And it may not be what you want or what a cousin or uncle or someone else would prefer for them to do, but it's interesting to me how your gift always falls in line with your talent, always falls in line with your passion, and always falls in line with just what you just plain like to do.
Yeah.
And so that is a wonderful lesson for all of our listeners too. There's so many pathways through life today. I mean, it's not
Yes.
just college and graduate school. There's great jobs to be had out there in carpentry and electrician or the arts and
Yeah.
to have a respect for whatever these choices are. Yeah, I think you really showed us this in this book as well. You pointed that out.
Yeah. Well,
And
she begins to respect, she's not saying that her decision not to marry should apply to everybody else. And she's actually kind of helping, put people together, and see some amusement in that. So it's like whatever a person's talents are, let them develop that talent and encourage them in any way that you can.
Yeah, you dealt with that issue too of expectations in terms of Catherine's mother and what were the expectations of a wealthy woman in Boston and who she should marry. And I thought that was interesting how that kind of trailed down through that next generation and throwing
Yeah.
off some of those expectations.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and how there was that passionate love that she had for her husband, but would she have been willing to cross the prairie and come to California with him? There was always that question, and that's something that Catherine has to think about. Would she have actually done it? And of course, there's no answer to that because it didn't turn out that way.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Catherine, and in the story, Catherine ended up really using her gifts and talents in extraordinary ways in this small town. I don't want to give out any spoilers, but it's just a beautiful story. And Kristen and I are very happy that Francine Rivers is using her gift and talent of writing. And can you give us a little clue? What's on your radar? What are you working on now, if you can share anything?
well, I'm not writing at the moment, but I'm listening to a whole bunch of interviews because I'm going to do a foreword for a book that's going to come out about our hometown, Pleasanton, a small town. It was about 3,000 when Rick and I were there, but they're doing and putting together stories and history of the town. So that's kind of what I'm doing. But I would like to do another book. I probably won't start writing until the fall. And it's going to be another Western. I love Westerns. It'll be another California-based story, but it will circle around the issue of revenge how many ways people take revenge without recognizing that's what it is, even within the church.
That sounds
So,
very interesting, doesn't it?
It does.
Well, we're going to be looking forward to that book coming out. And I want to say to our listeners, you're going to want to connect with Francine Rivers. You can find her on her website, also Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And Francine, it's been an absolute pleasure meeting you.
well,
We
thank you
loved
very
ha-
much. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
we loved having you.
Thank
Hope to
you.
see you soon.
Okay. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
So many great discussion topics with Francine there. I can't even begin to say what hit you the strongest, Kristen.
A lot of things. There were many, many layers that, as we're even talking about it, there's connections coming to mind. One of them was the role of politics in addressing some of these social wrongs. And, here she was really playing with that theme of women and this right to vote as being very important in effectuating the changes that some of these women wanted to make. And I was wondering if you thought that politics offers the same opportunity now in light of how um, polarized things are. What do you think?
Well, that's a good question. I would hope so. I feel like we're definitely compared to back then. The question that you brought up with this lawlessness of this town, and it's out in the middle of nowhere. There's no communication, unlike today, where you have a camera and a video, and there's cameras on the highway and in front of storefronts, and everyone knows where you are. But back then, it was a free for all. People did whatever they wanted. And so I guess I'm grateful for the law. I am grateful for our government. And I think we live in a country where we enjoy a lot of freedoms because of all of this. But as always, it's not perfect. There's always room for improvement.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. When politics and the role of government is functioning as it should, then I think it's a very effective tool to start addressing some of these wrongs that we see. In this book, there's environmental wrongs, there are wrongs against women. She really covered the gamut. But when politics and the government, when it's not functioning in the way that it should, and there's that imbalance, then I see where it can do more harm to some of those areas. And we're increasing some of these social ills. Possibly that's what's going on today in terms of violence and other things that we're experiencing.
Yeah, I think so. And you know, the saying, increased power is increased corruption when there's too much power in one location. The other thing that struck me of this story that really stayed with me is um, these miners. I can't get over these miners coming over and asking Catherine to marry them. And they didn't even know her. And I said, oh, that's so ridiculous. And then I thought, we live in a different culture today. And why do people get married? And some people are in love. Thank goodness I was. I'm very grateful for that and am. But there are a lot of people who do get married for other reasons. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. But maybe you have financial stress, or maybe you are a single mother, or maybe all your friends, and you're 35 and all your friends are getting married and your biological clock is ticking. There's just so many different reasons for marriage. And did you think anything about that? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. That's kind of struck me as well because there were other marriage themes running through this book. And, I was thinking about the fact that you're right. Some people marry for, quote unquote, the wrong reasons. But I think as long as both of the parties are on board with what those reasons are, then, that could be a satisfying and fulfilling relationship. I know people who have married for companionship only. There was no real romantic interest, but they wanted a life partner in that commitment. And there's other people who have married solely as a transactional matter. They are concerned about their financial future. And again, if both parties are on board with that, fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the problem comes when one party has one agenda and the other party is under the impression it's something different, that's where we get into a lot of heartache.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think marriage can be a wonderful thing. And unlike hundreds of years ago, it can translate into all different kinds of things and reasons for that union. And I kind of like the idea of that it could translate to different things. So do you have one big takeaway? What's on your radar?
Well, you're going to think I'm a little out there with this one.
I know
I know
you
I've
do.
said that a couple times, and usually it's true. But I'm really fascinated with mines out in the West. And so one of the takeaways for me is I'm always kind of investigating the impact on natural resources, on fresh water. of these mines, because we're dealing with the legacy of these mines from the 1870s, 1880s. And believe it or not, we're still dealing with the legacy of them. There's a very large percentage, for example, of waters in Colorado, like 40% of the rivers are in some way impaired because of mining operations, many of which were in the 1870s. So some of the issues that she broached in the book, they were very subtle, but I've been really kind of focusing and zeroing in on some of those this week.
I know that you just had a trip out to Colorado, and I know that you love everything environmental, and that this has been quite a interesting, eye-opening discovery that you've made.
Yes.
And so, yeah, and I spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania, and the coal mines have caused a myriad of problems with lung cancer and all kinds of things that people weren't aware of when they worked in it so many years ago. So yeah, unless you have a mine in your town, you may not think this right away, but it is something that affects our nation as a whole.
Absolutely. What's on your radar, Chris?
That's about it. I've got nothing else. I'm so much in love with this book, and I just love Francine Rivers, and it was so nice to finally meet her here today. And so if you want, if please, readers, check out Our Lady's Mine, and also, of course, Redeeming Love, that sat for 15 years on every bestseller list. Just an amazing story that everyone can relate to.
And also, I'm going to add to the movie Redeeming Love. I watched it. Excellent. Excellent. There's some sensitive topics. It gets a little gritty at times, which is why I loved it, because it's dealing with some of these tough issues that we just need to confront in our society. And I thought it was well acted. I thought it was fantastic. I would definitely recommend that movie.
And I feel the same, because Kristen and I believe we got to talk about these gritty issues and these hot button topics, because we live in a real world among these issues, and we have to be able to communicate them and put them out there, not shovel them under the rug. And I loved Francine's movie. We are both very big endorsers of that film. Absolutely. So in the meantime, let me just give a little shout out to our very talented sound engineer, the Mr. Mark Carey, and he is also our producer. He makes us sound good and oftentimes even makes us look good, lighting and so forth. Mark, you want to say hi real quick? He's even working as we speak, but I like him to poke his head in so you can see the brains behind what goes on here. There he is.
Hello.
Maybe the beauty.
Hope you guys all enjoyed the show. And have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Mark. Stay on the radar with Kristen and I. You can see us at our website, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And if we want to throw out a few storm predictions, because we've got some great spring lineup here. Ellen Marie Wiseman and the Lost Girls of Willowbrook. We have Teresa Ann Fowler, and it all comes down to this. We have Sarah McCoy and Mustique Island, and we have Kate White and The Second Husband.
Until next time, listeners, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.